So my name is Ryan. I'm the Director of Program Management for the Common Data Service, and we're going to talk about CDS today. We're going to talk about connectors today, and we're going to talk about the different types of data that we have within the Power Platform and how that helps you interconnect the different parts of the business applications that you are going to build. There are going to be 3 sets of content and demos today. We're going to start with an overview of types of data, talk about CDS, and then I'm going to give you a lap of CDS and the capabilities that it provides. I'm then going to shift gears and we're going to talk about new stuff, but I'm not going to tell you what that is just yet. So, first of all, let's talk about data. How many of you guys have seen the flywheel slide before, where data is central to all digital transformation because the data is what we know? And with that data, we use Power Apps to take action against that data. We use automate, not flow, to automate against that data or the things that we know. We use Power BI to analyze the data or what we know. And we use AI Builder to learn from that data. But where does data come from? It sounds like a question my 6-year-old would ask me. And so the thing is, data comes from 2 places. It can come from connectors, once again, facilitating activity, automation, analysis, or learning. And data can also come from the Common Data Service as well. And so you might be thinking, well, like, what's the difference between these 2 places that data come from, and why might I choose one over the other? That's a great question. And so the way that I frame this is I look at it in kind of along 2 pivots. I look at external data. This is data that lives outside of the Power Platform, and we connect to it. And then we have internal data. This is data that resides within the Power Platform. That is a native intrinsic part of the Power Platform. And we provide connectivity to external and internal data via connectors for external data, and our internal data story is built around the Common Data Service. Make sense up until this point? Awesome. And so one slide that I actually added that I thought would be really important for us to touch on is the types of apps that you can build over the different types of data, right? As you guys know, Power Apps come in 2 flavors, Canvas-driven applications and model-driven apps. Canvas apps can be built over connectors or CDS. Model-driven apps can only be built against CDS. Portals can only be built against CDS. Flows can work across both. AI Builder works against CDS, and Power BI works across both types of data. So this is something that I think was important to cover, because at the booth, it's inevitable somebody will come up and say, hey, how do I build a model-driven app against my connector? And I have to go, womp, womp, sad trombone, nothing I can do to help you. You can embed a Canvas app, though, in a model-driven app, if you so choose, giving you a UX mashup to remote data. So with that in mind, why might you build data against, or build apps against external data via connectors? I think there's really 2 reasons for this. Number one is it's super easy, right? You already have data in your organization that lives in a SharePoint list somewhere, lives in a SQL Server somewhere, lives in some other endpoint, perhaps behind a custom connector. And it's really easy just to connect your application to that data that already exists. You don't want to move it, you don't want to redefine its shape, so on and so forth. The other thing is, in some cases, these remote places where your data lives, it's their home. I envision Happy Gilmore shouting at the golf ball, go to your home. But anyway, it's where that data lives. There's already a system of record for that data. You don't want to move it, and you just want to connect your apps to that data. And so with connectors, there's a bunch of cool things going on here. Number one is just the sheer volume of connectors that we have. We have over 275 connectors available today. The other thing is via our on-premises gateway, we provide you with seamless connectivity to that data. If you so choose, if there is not a connector currently available for your data source, you can build a custom connector. And then finally, you know, the thing that's interesting with connectors is when you have these different distributed systems, by adding those different connections to your Power App or Flow, you're not able to like break down the silos, but you're able to like connect across the silos. And that can be very powerful for building simple, basic applications. Now, the other thing is, well, why might we use internal data, and why might we put data in the Common Data Service? And the first reason I would say, and I'm biased here, is it's smart. The Common Data Service understands the shape of your data, and I'll show more about what this looks like later, and it's able to provide that information in a very rich and robust way to the apps, to the AI models, so on and so forth that you're building. Item number 2 is it's very, very scalable. We have customers that run huge workloads on top of the common data service. Like for example, one particular hardware manufacturer, when the hard disk fails in your server or your laptop, if you have a service contract with them, the ILO board goes out and pings an instance of the common data service, and they dispatch the person to replace your hard disk based on the contracts and agreements that are stored within the common data service. Another large electronics retailer, when you say, hey, I need you to hang my TV up on the wall, all of those operations are managed through CDS. And then the final thing is it's very, very secure. When we look at the type of data that people store in the common data servers, whether it's customer data, whether it's sensitive operational data, it is built from the ground up to make sure that your data is stored in a secure and compliant manner so that you can have an excellent security and compliance posture. So let's talk a bit about the value proposition of the common data service. The common data service, number 1, easily structures. Number 2, a variety of data and business logic. To 3, support interconnected applications and processes. In 4, a secure and compliant manner. Did I count correctly there? We'll say I did. And so we'll go through these one at a time. Number 1 is it's very easy to define the shape of your structure, or let me try that again. It's very easy to define the structure of your data in the common data service in a simple point and click manner, very similar to what you're accustomed to doing when you're building Power Apps or Flow today. You don't need to be able to write SQL statements. You don't need to understand how to do complex distributed transactions. It's just done. The next thing is we support storing a variety of data. One of the things that we say a lot about the common data service is it's far more than just a database. Yes, we allow you to store relational data, but we also store log data. We also store file data. We also store image data. And we use a variety of storage subsystems provided to us by Azure to support that. And I'll dig into that a little bit more later. The other thing is we allow you to define your business logic. And what's key about doing this is your business logic is defined in a central place in a way that can support a broad set of interconnected applications. And this is something that's actually very, very critical. When we look at how we're looking to accelerate the revolution of the digital flywheel, boy, I guess I really abused that metaphor. The thing is, we see that it's very important to have data that where one application can inform or improve another, right? You don't want to, let's say, call a customer and try to sell them something if they already have a bunch of open or active support cases, right? You might want to address those support cases before you try to close that sale. However, historically, if we look at how we've solved this problem, we build an app for sales, we build an app for service, and they're not connected in the middle at all, right? We build lots and lots of silos. The common data service is built from the ground up to support multiple applications running over the top of the same data to support interconnected business processes and applications. And then finally, we do this in a secure and compliant manner, and I'll touch on this a little bit more later. And so I want to look at what's in the box, if you will. And so the first thing is everything that you do in the common data service is via an API. Now, you don't have to work with these APIs if you don't want to, but it's really important to understand that they're there. When you go in and you create an entity, that's calling an OData API. When you retrieve information about the shape of that entity, that's coming through an OData API. When you create a record for that entity, that's flowing through those APIs. And everything that we do in the common data service is beneath this API, allowing full abstraction of all the complex stuff behind the scenes from your applications. And this is the endpoint that Power BI, Power Apps, Automate, AI Builder are consuming. Or the other thing is, because it is a standards-based OData API, if you like, you can also build custom applications in Visual Studio or Xamarin to consume that API endpoint. So what's behind that API endpoint? As soon as you hit our API, the first thing that you hit is our security layer. This is where we handle things like authentication, where we integrate very, very deeply with Azure Active Directory to ensure that we know that a user is who they say they are. This is where we enforce things like conditional access, supporting things like network access policies, multi-factor authentication, so on and so forth. We then go to authorization. We have a very, very rich set of authorization rules within the common data service that allow you to define very, very precisely which users can access which data, all the way down to the field or the row level, the row or the field level. And then finally, with all these people interacting with the system, you need to know who did what. And so we have a set of very, very robust data auditing capabilities so that you can see who changed what when, and I'll demonstrate that for you later. From there, we go into our business logic tier. This is where we have things like asynchronous processing, where we have calculated rollup fields, where we have business rules, where we have duplicate detection, where we have plugins, where you can write your own custom C# code, if you so choose, that operates within the middle of our processing pipeline. We have workflows as well, once again, that can run synchronously or asynchronously. But this very, very rich logic layer that sits beneath our APIs. And the benefit of this being beneath the API is that everybody that interacts with that API has the exact same business logic applied to their data. This is critical, once again, when you're looking to support a set of interconnected applications. Because in other systems that we see, people will have a data store of some sort, and then they'll build a bunch of service layers over the top of it, but then we find out that half the people go and talk directly to the data layer. You don't have that problem with CDS, because we provide that single place for you to define your business logic as well as define your data, which brings us to our next arch. Data, this allows, of course, things like data catalog and discovery to understand which environments exist, to understand which data resides within different environments. Things like data modeling that allows you to express the shape of your data. Things like reporting for generated paginated reports for things like receipts or billing confirmations or statements. Data validation that allows you to build rich apps that very quickly respond to invalid customer input. And then, of course, the Common Data Services makes huge use of the Common Data Model, which is a language for describing the shape of your data, as well as use of that language to describe the shape of the most common business entities that we've seen people using to build their business applications over the last 2 decades that we've been running the Dynamics business. Then we get to our storage tier. And this is where, of course, we store things in Azure SQL. We're one of the world's largest Azure SQL customers. We store things in File and Blob. We store things in other storage systems for log, support for semi-structured data. Of course, we do all sorts of interesting things around how we can help you search, find, and locate your data. And then, of course, new introduction is also Data Lake for supporting large AI ML type scenarios behind the scenes. And then finally, we get to our integration tier, because we realize that CDS does not exist in its own world. You need to be able to connect the Common Data Service with other things. And so, of course, you have our API endpoint for integration that we discussed earlier, but then you also have our eventing capabilities where we can publish events to Service Bus or Event Hub. We have webhooks where you can invoke a webhook API endpoint exposed by Azure Functions, app services, VM scale sets, Kubernetes, some other cloud provider, just webhooks. And then data export as well, which are a set of capabilities around how you can get your data out of the Common Data Service and then into raw SQL or into Azure Data Lake to support reporting or other similar types of scenarios. Whew, that's the last build on that slide, so there aren't any more animations. I saw lots of cameras coming out, so this is it. If it makes you feel any better, it's really hard to remember which things are in which animations. And so the worst thing ever as a presenter is you click and find out there were like 4 more animations in the slide. So one of the common questions that I want to get and I want to quickly address is, what's the difference between the Power Platform, Power Apps, and the Common Data Service? We are no longer supposed to think inside of the box. We are supposed to have a growth mindset, and therefore we will think inside the oval. So we have an oval that represents the Power Platform. Within the Power Platform, we have all the things that we spoke about earlier, the Common Data Service, Power BI, Power Apps, Automate, and AI Builder. But what I really want you to take home from this is, Automate is not Power Apps is not CDS, AI Builder is not Power BI. We all have these discrete components that together make up the Power Platform. Make sense? I'll give a few more seconds because I see lots of cameras out. Okay. The other thing that we get lots of questions about is, well, what's the relationship between the Common Data Service and this Azure thing? And I love this slide because I worked in Azure for many, many years until coming to Power Apps about 2 years ago. And so that same API endpoint that we talked about earlier, it's right there on the screen. And within this box, sorry, we're thinking inside of boxes again, but we have everything that's encapsulated behind that endpoint. So we have load balancer, networking things, we have a bunch of VM scale sets, we have literally hundreds of thousands of individual machines deployed around the globe supporting the Common Data Service, and these things serve different functions. We have our web roles where we expose all our APIs. We have our job servers where we handle all of our asynchronous processing. We have our sandbox servers where we host custom code that you write for security reasons. We have our reporting services, which host SQL Server reporting services for paginated reports. We then have our storage tier, where relational data is going into SQL Elastic pools. We have Azure Storage, where we're placing our blobs. We have Cosmos DB, where we're storing log data as well as our mobile offline data. We have Azure Search, where we're indexing the data that you place in the Common Data Service for easy retrieval. And then we have the data lake, where we maintain replicas of that data to support your AI builder and ML-related scenarios. But more importantly, there we go. We extend with Azure. As I mentioned earlier, with all the eventing capabilities that we have, you can invoke Azure Functions, you can publish events to Event Hub, Service Bus, you can invoke also, once again, webhooks hosted by app services, VM scale sets, Kubernetes, so on and so forth, okay? So this is in case, I mean, I guess some of you guys are probably the IT guys, right? But sometimes your IT guys will say, well, what's kind of behind the scenes? You now have a beautiful architecture diagram to show them. I'll let you guys get a picture of that. By the way, all these slides will be available afterwards. So I now want to show you a demo. And this demo is going to be fun because it has 13 tabs, and I left my demo notes in the speaker workroom. By the way, guys, thank you for laughing at my horrible jokes. There's nothing worse than being up here and like just they all fall flat. The other important thing that I have to do is press this button right here, otherwise I'll just be demoing for myself. And so what I pulled up here is the Power Apps Maker experience. I've expanded the data tabs, and here I have enumerated entities. And so there's a bunch of entities that are in the system, once again, pre-populated. These are what you see documented as a part of the common data model. And so I'm going to look at one of our entities, which is our contact entity. Now, Virgin, in this case, they didn't need to determine what a contact looked like. Contact is defined in the common data model. And so an entity is composed of one-to-many fields. And so, for example, I can go and look at, like, let's look for a zip or a postal code. And so you'll see here I'm able to define the type of that. I'm also able to define constraints about this. And so you'll see that there's a maximum length set on this particular field. Now, if I turn around and go over to my application experience and scroll down to the zip postal code and enter in some sort of garbage zip code, and watch, I'm going to hit tab, bam, really fast, immediate validation. That didn't go through a server round trip, okay? What happens is we actually make the metadata available about the constraints that we apply to our data available for consumption through our OData APIs so that the clients can perform rich and intelligent things based on that. Another example of that is CDS provides a bunch of rich types as well. And so I'll go and look at a particular field like a phone number. And so I'll pull this up, and you'll notice it's not a number or text field or whatever. It's actually a phone data type. And so what that does is that allows us to render smarter controls within our applications. And so here, if I scroll to Yvonne's mobile phone number, if I were to click this button right here, it would dial her phone number. I am not going to call Yvonne right now. I did that once in a demo. It was kind of fun trying to get Teams to hang up in the middle of one of these things. So let's see, we've talked about fields, we have talked about validation. So the next thing I want to show you is how we're able to express relationships within the system. When we think about how we derive value from data, we have to understand how different pieces of data are related to one another. And the Common Data Service supports natively defining these relationships as well as representing these relationships through our metadata. And these are the things that power things like the navigation experience that you see within your model-driven applications. And so here, if I look at the specific relationship that Virgin created, they actually created relationships between the contact and like the flight manifest, health questionnaire, and spa booking, so that they understand the relationship between a given contact and those things. Oh, there's one important thing I forgot to touch on briefly. What is this app? So Virgin Atlantic, they fly airplanes, they have frequent flyer programs, they run lounges. In these lounges, they provide a set of spa services. This is an application for managing contacts, for managing their spa bookings, and for managing the offers that they provide within those spas. Okay? Sorry, I should have said that to begin. Forgive me. That's what happens when you leave your notes somewhere between here and the speaker room. So we have these relationships, and so these relationships get used also in our business logic tier, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And so now what I'm going to do, so fields, we have the ones that you define, that you gather from users, maybe they get populated automatically via flows, but we also have business logic in that you're able to define calculated fields. These would be similar to like a computed column in SQL. And so here what I've done is I've created a calculated field that allows me to compose a greeting. So hello, Mr. Jones. Nobody ever calls me that. Or if I don't have a last name or a salutation, I can say hello and then their first name. Or if I don't have either of those things, even though I'd really question the correctness of our data, if that was the case, we can simply just say hello, right? So that people can provide a personalized experience based on business logic that they've defined that is consistent, okay? So the other thing I want to show you is we also have what we call roll-up fields. Roll-up fields are aggregations that are performed across a relationship, like what we talked about earlier. And so in this case, what I've defined is a roll-up field, which calculates the number of bookings for a given frequent flyer. And you'll see that through the relationship between contact and spa bookings, we count the number of spa bookings for that given contact. And so if I go back to my application, you can actually see how these things manifest themselves in the experience. Here I have my greeting, which is hello, Miss McKay. And then over here, you'll see that I expose the number of spa bookings. Now, you might notice that that middle pane looks a little bit different than everything else. Why? That's a Canvas application that is embedded within a model-driven application, but both of them are being powered by the data that resides in the common data service, so that you have a consistent view of data across applications, even when those applications are embedded within one another. I guess it's like an inception thing of sorts. So the other thing that we see is it's very, very important that we maintain high levels of data quality, right? To follow kind of the garbage in, garbage out metaphor, one of the things that I've seen is people are like, oh, I want to apply AI and machine learning to my data set. And I then turn around and ask them, so what's the quality of your data set? And they're like, oh, we don't have addresses for half of our customers. And it's like, well, you know, you might want to improve on data quality a little bit because the insights that you're going to get from that data might not be super great if data quality is low. And so CDS provides some capabilities around how you can improve your data quality. This includes things like making certain fields required, also calculating fields like I showed you so that you don't rely on users to input things. But we also do things around ensuring that data entered doesn't already exist in the system, things like dupe detection. And so if I were to turn around and try to create a member here called Mike Jones, and then I'm going to scroll down to email and do mjones@gmail.com, and then I click save, what you're going to see is the Common Data Service sees, oh, wait a second, there's already a record here that looks kind of similar to this. And we have a Michael Jones in the system that happens to have the same email address. And we're like, hey, do you really want to create this new contact? This guy might already exist. Now, I could tell you that this is amazing AI and all this stuff. It's basic pattern matching, okay? I don't want to oversell it, but it does provide some pretty good usability behind the scenes or value. So now what I'm going to show you is our offer dashboard. And this is the experience that's used to manage the offers that are provided within the spa. A dashboard is a collection of charts, so data visualizations, as well as views. And views are definitions around how we want to show a set of records to the user. It's used in both our Canvas apps as well as our model-driven apps, but it also has meaning within CDS as well. What we actually do is we look at those view definitions, we look at how they're used, and then we optimize how we store that data based on those views. So like, how many of you have like dealt with index management in SQL before? Okay, we do those things automatically for you based on the view definitions as well as based on the usage patterns against those views. And so of course it defines like default sort, columns that are included, so on and so forth. And so I'm going to go down here and I'm going to click new, and we're going to create a new offer. And so one of the things, and this is one of the places where CDS integrates very well with Flow, we see that there's lots of cases where getting all the information that's needed to drive a given business process, it's kind of complicated. And so what we've done is CDS works with Flow to provide what we call business process flows. We're able to take a complicated process of gathering lots of information from customers and break it down into smaller individual parts. And so here for our offer, let's see, we will create a new offer. We'll call it the Ignite CDS Special. And then our minimum tier availability we will select. We'll make that Flying Club red. We want it to be accessible for all frequent flyers. And so I'm now going to save that. And so what you'll notice is my, what do we want to call this thing? Phase thingamadoo, technical term there. Definitely didn't go through the marketing team. But it actually split into a bunch of different sections based on the data that I provided, because I said this thing is available all the way at our red tier, and so we need to gather information about the offer's costs at our red, silver, and gold member tiers. I'll move to the next stage. Let me show you what this looks like. Beware, guys, this is going to be a bit of an eye chart. Okay, so we define the stage where we get the basic information. We then turn around and look at a condition to see how it's configured, and then we split out to more or less define all of the additional tiers within the business process. Okay, and so I'll go through, and let's say that for you guys, the minimum price will be 10 somethings, $10. And so now I'll go through and set the price for my silver members. My silver members are more frequent flyers, so I probably want to make sure that my pricing is better for them than it is for my base tier of service. However, I don't want it to be any worse. And so we're able to implement this through what we call business rules. And so on the spa offer, I've defined several different types of business rules. One of which is looking to see if my gold price is greater than my silver price, throw an error, and then if my silver price is greater than my base price, also throw an error. And so let's take a look at what one of those business rules looks like. Here I have a condition. I look to see is my silver member price greater than my base price, and if so, I will throw an error message that says, please ensure prices for our frequent customers are equal to or less than our base prices. And so if I go back to my app where I'm defining the offer, and I turn around and try to sell this at $11 and watch, tab, immediately, no server round trip involved, it shows that, hey, this thing is not priced correctly, and so you need to price it correctly. And what we're doing here is we're making these business rules available not just beneath our API and applying them there, but also applying them within the clients that are consuming our APIs. Our smart APIs can consume our smart clients can consume these business rules to apply the business logic in the client as well to provide a richer experience. And so if I set that to 10, it's all happy. If I set it to 9, it's also happy. And then I can proceed on to the next stage. So those are business processes and business rules. Now I'm going to move on to search. And so, of course, we see as people put more and more data within the Common Data Service, especially as that data serves multiple different types of applications, it becomes very, very different to find that. And so what we do is we allow you to index or define that you want to make certain fields searchable that you place within the Common Data Service. And so I can go right here and I can say, hey, I'm looking for someone named Yvonne. And right there, we very quickly well, what would happen is we would provide information about Yvonne, and we support things like exact match, ranking based on precision of match, relevance of that thing, so on and so forth. That makes me nervous, makes me wonder if I might have challenges later in the demo. So now let's take a look at the Canvas application that's actually used by the greeter that is within the spa. And so I'm going to click here. There we go. And so I just scanned Miss McKay's boarding pass. You'll see the greeting that we defined as a calculated field, and then I can proceed to go and create a spa booking for her. And so we will provide for her the special offer for Ignite attendees. Click Next. I will do a signature for her. Shh, don't tell her. And then I'll submit that. And so we've created, I'll now confirm it. You can tell someone at Microsoft built this demo. And then, of course, we have her spa booking created. And so the important thing to remember here, right, is we've looked at two very, very different applications. One application which was used for managing the back office. It was a model-driven application. and then an application that was used for running the canvas, for running the actual check-in experience or booking experience within the spa. Now, one of the things that we thought would be cool is, well, what might it mean for us to be able to generate like a booking confirmation or some sort of durable document for this customer to use after the fact, or to reference after the fact. And so with our reporting capabilities within the Common Data Service, here's a booking confirmation that I generated in the past and emailed to myself. So it's a little old. But what we can do is we can generate for you a PDF or what have you using SQL Server reporting services. We call this paginated reporting, so that you have these sorts of documents, once again, all provided with you or to you over the data that's stored within the Common Data Service. And then the final thing, I noticed that there was something peculiar about Yvonne's account, namely that her mileage balance looks suspiciously like the maximum value that that you could have. And so, you know, we have these auditing capabilities that I mentioned earlier. And so if I go and look at my audit history, I can actually see it appears that Mr. Clay Wessner made an edit to Yvonne McKay yesterday afternoon. And so I can actually pull up the details right here, and what I'll see, oh, it looks like Mr. Wessner is very, very generous, boosting Ms. McKay's mileage balance from 5,000 to 2, whatever, I can't count that many numbers, 2 billion something. So anyway, once again, you know, we've authenticated, we've authorized, but people can still do weird things with data sometimes, right? And CDS provides you with a great way to understand who did what at any given point in time. So that concludes the first batch of demos that I have that give us a lap of the capabilities of the Common Data Service. We walked through entities, we walked through fields, we walked through calculated fields, we walked through roll-ups, we walked through duplicate detection, we walked through business process flows, we walked through business rules, we walked through, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting. Search, oh, let's see if it came back. It did come back, there we go, we found Yvonne. We then walked through how the different applications work together over the top of common data, and so we showed Canvas apps, model-driven app flows, CDS working together in that demo. So now let's proceed with some of the new stuff. So the first thing that's new, improved image capabilities for Common Data Service. We now have support for full-size images. So no longer will you upload a beautiful full-size high-resolution image and we size it down to a 144 by 144 pixel square. We allow you to now configure multiple images on a given entity. You can configure which image on the entity is the primary image. And behind the scenes, we leverage heterogeneous storage for this. And you might just say, oh, Ryan, well, you goofballs no longer just throw it all in SQL. Well, that's partially true. What we do is the full-size image we place in blob behind the scenes. The little thumbnails we actually still store in SQL. And what that does is that allows us to render lists of things very, very quickly while kind of keeping things lightweight, if that makes sense. Because otherwise, when you tried to render a gallery in your Power App, you'd perform like 500 different retrieves against those full-size images. And then the app would never load when that person's on like a 3G connection in the middle of Idaho. The other thing is, so this is available in Canvas apps nowish. It's still deploying. It'll come to model-driven apps later this year. One thing to be very careful about, though, is large photos, especially on that mobile user that's using a 3G connection in the middle of Idaho. I don't know why I picked Idaho. It could be Washington. Let's go with Washington since I live there. So just something to be mindful of as you use this in your applications. And it's in the process of being deployed globally right now. The other thing that we're introducing is our new file data type. This allows files to be configured as fields directly on an entity. We support multiple files per entity, and this allows you to have what I call strongly typed files, right? We've had attachments and notes in the platform for many, many years, but it was super, super confusing sometimes when you had this attachment that served this purpose and this attachment would serve another purpose. This is a much more straightforward way of enabling those scenarios. Behind the scenes, we leverage our heterogeneous storage, and that these assets go into blob behind the scenes, so they count as file storage rather than database storage. And also, once again, please be careful. Big files can cause performance issues on mobile. And so let's take a look at this. So I am going to create a simple inspection app. And I am inspired by the FHA loan process, because apparently at one point in time there was a big problem around fraudulent loans being sent out. And so there's a requirement now that for any FHA loan, among other things, they require a picture of the front of the house, a picture of the back of the house, I guess in case you just had the facade, and also a drawing of the floor plan. And funny thing, this lends itself really, really well to creating an entity that has a few full-size images as well as a file on it. And so let's create this entity as well as an app. And so I'm going to call this my Ignite Inspection. Note, I am not going to click the Enable for Attachments capabilities. This is the way that you used to do this in the past. There is now a better way. I'm going to click Create, and while it's creating my entity, I'm going to start adding fields. I'm going to create an entity called the front, and for data type, I'm going to go through and I am going to select Image. I'm going to say it's the primary image, and I'm going to say it can store full images. I am then going to go to Add Field. This will be back. I will set it to Image. And I will say it can also store images. I will not make it primary because I want the front of the house to be the primary image. I'm then going to add one more field, which is floor plan. I'm going to make that a file. Hit done. And now I am going to click Save. And so it's now adding the fields to that entity. We'll have to wait a moment. I do have to wait for this to finish because the next part of the demo depends on it. There we go. You guys lucked out. I was about to start telling jokes. And so now let's create an app. And so I am going to use this connector. By the way, one of the things that's important to note as you build flows and Power Apps against the Common Data Service, how many of you have seen the new connector that says current environment? Okay. For those of you that haven't, if you're building things against CDS, use that one, because what it does is actually connects your flows and Power Apps directly to CDS. It has huge performance, availability, and functional benefits in it. I'm now going to search for my Ignite Inspection app or entity, and I'm going to create an app from that. And so it's going to generate in standard Power Apps form a 3-screen app over the top of that data. And so my next step will be I'm going to customize the fields that show up on my details screen form. So I'm going to change the field selected. I'm going to add field. I'm going to add front. I'm going to add back, and I'm going to add floor plan. And I'm going to hit add. I'm then going to go through and expand that form and look at the data cards for these new items. I'm going to go to the data value and go to advanced, unlocked. And to get the full-size image, brace yourself, guys, .full, okay? I'm going to do the same thing here as well. Sorry, this is where the demo becomes just a little bit repetitive, so I'm going to go as fast as I can. And now I'm going to do the same thing on my edit screen. And the reason that we do this, where we default to the small image first, is because we don't want your apps unintentionally bringing down like 11 billion gigabytes of data unintentionally. So we still use the thumbnails or the smaller images by default. And so I'm going to add front, back, floor plan, add. And then I'm going to go to my front data card. I'm going to go to the value, advanced, unlock, .full, and then back, default, unlock, full. Beautiful. And so now we're going to launch our app. And so we'll do a new inspection. This will be the lake house. I don't have a lake house, by the way. And so here's a picture of that lake house. And then from the back, here's a picture of the back of the lake house. And then for the floor plan, we will pick a floor plan. I'll save that. And so we now have the lake house with full-size images for front and back. If I pull that up and edit it and zoom in, you'll see that that resolution is far, far higher than 144 by 144 pixels. So, and by the way, how many of you have built Power Apps with images before? Okay, does that look a little bit easier? Okay, cool, that's the goal. Also with files, okay. So the next thing, I said I was gonna talk about Power BI, and I haven't talked about Power BI yet. I wonder what we're gonna do for the last 5 minutes. So 4 different ways that you can connect the Common Data Service to Power BI. Number 1 is what you're most familiar with, which is the import to Power BI experience. This is great because it brings all your data into the cube that sits behind Power BI and allows you to slice and dice very, very quickly. We also have full data export from the data lake via Power BI Dataflows, and there's a session here in a couple days that goes into this in detail. We also have incremental to data lake, or incremental sync to data lake via export to lake. This is in preview right now, and it's a more efficient way of continuously replicating data from the Common Data Service into the Azure Data Lake that you provide. And then finally, coming soon to CDS is Direct Query. We're very excited about this because we view that it solves 3 key pain points that our customers have told us about. Number 1 is I go to Power BI and the data that I see is stale or not currently in sync with the data that I have in my Power Apps and my flows. Item number 2 is a lot of times the data that I see in Power BI is based on the context of the user that was used to synchronize data into Power BI, not necessarily the data that is relevant to me. The third thing that we see is, well, it's actually that relevance part, right? There's kind of what you should be able to see from a security perspective, but there's also what you should be able to see from a business relevance perspective. And so through Direct Query, what we're able to do is directly service the queries that that are being generated by your actions in Power BI within the Common Data Service. And so our hope is this will be able to tighten the loop between action, automation, analysis, and learning, with CDS, of course, at the middle. And so I have a demo of this. The engineer gave me the bits last night, so we'll see how it works. I have a Power BI report that shows my case dashboard. I know it says sales report at the top, ignore that. And so you can see that I have charts that represent my case origin, my case status, the customers that opened the case, as well as my severity of the cases. And so you will see right now I have 1 low severity case and I have 3 normal severity cases. Well, let's go through and let's change that. So here I have active cases. I'm going to go through complete overhaul required. I'm going to change my case severity from priority to high, and I'm going to save that. And so normally what would happen is when I'd go back to Power BI, I'd have to wait 6 hours or whatever it was for Power BI to refresh data from CDS, right? However, fingers crossed. And so now what's happening is it's refreshing the data. And so here, boom, high severity case in Power BI. So ignoring the fact that I had to log in again, it took like, what, 5 seconds to update our dashboards. And so we really think that for operational reporting scenarios, this is going to be super, super key and critical to accelerating the digital feedback loop. And so a few things that I want us to touch on. One is you can bring data into CDS using Power BI Dataflows, as well as Excel and a bunch of other tools. And so there's a session later this week that you guys should totally check out about Power Platform Dataflows. Deeper dives on topics that we've covered. Number 1 is exporting CDS data to Azure Data Lake. That's the incremental sync that we talked about earlier for Power BI. That is this afternoon. Democratizing self-service data prep with Dataflows, getting data into CDS and massaging it along the way. Miguel's giving that tomorrow. And then building and troubleshooting custom logic in the Common Data Service, because we really only scratched the surface. Jim will be discussing that on Thursday as well. I see cameras out, so I'll give just 1 moment. Okay. Get bonafide using Microsoft Learn. You can learn all about CDS. We have 17 modules that will help you become a Power expert. Also, I'll be in the hub all day. If you have questions, feel free to drop by. We'd love to talk to you. We talked about how apps are built over internal and external data. Connectors give us external data. Common Data Service provides internal data. External is great to get started and connect to existing systems of record. Internal is great for complex, high-scale, or sensitive apps. And the Common Data Service connects Power Apps with Flows, now Power Automate, with AI Builder and Power BI. Thank you guys so much for your time. I do have a request, if you could. When you fill out your evals, tell me what you liked, or if you didn't like it, tell me what you didn't like so I can make it better next time, okay? Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great one.